Check, check. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Bambei Brewing and our latest installment of the Science Series Public Talks. These have been very successful and welcomed here, and we're excited to have Eric Copenhave with us. He's a Superior resident and he's an excellent resident. He is a neighbor, he's a new father, and he is a quantum physicist. And he's going to talk about quantum computing at us, and hopefully we can absorb a small amount of it and go home a little bit smarter than we arrived tonight. So without further ado, Eric.
Thank you, Jeff. I've never been called a superior resident before. I appreciate the kind words. Thanks.
Oh, worse.
No, much worse than that. Thanks to Jeff and Holly, I guess, for the introduction and invitation to speak to you all. I am very excited to speak to you all about something that is near and dear to my heart. I do want to talk about quantum computing tonight. Quantum computing is very well positioned, super positioned, you might say, to solve a lot of really important problems in society. For example, there's lots of problems related to healthcare, related to energy, climate change, optimization, which is sort of a ubiquitous computational thing that shows up, that quantum computing has a lot of potential to help us solve. Now, I really want to motivate why you need a quantum computer, which is not a regular computer, and how they work differently and why that's going to be impactful for us. So we're going to take a little bit of a slower journey to get there. We're going to spend a lot of time really understanding where that motivation comes from. But I think at the end of the day, once we have these quantum computers online and engineered well, these are going to be one of the coolest machines that humanity has ever built. And humanity has a pretty rich history of building really cool machines. So we have this like apartment complex up in the sky where residents float around in zero gravity and eat funny meals. We have rocket ships that send astronauts to that funny apartment complex and the stars. We have fusion reactors that reproduce the inner workings of the stars that those astronauts are getting sent to. And among the other cool things that are going on are these patterning devices, these huge machines that basically take or project images onto silicon wafers to produce computer chips. And the features that these computer chips are pushing are now down like close to the size of atoms, which is a truly remarkable feat. And not only can we go really small, but we can scale up those systems to incredibly large sizes. So here we're looking at some supercomputer in China that made headlines a couple years ago. This is called Sunwave Type Light. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but anyway, it's a supercomputer. There's a huge room full of servers and whatnot. But in the background, while we humans were busy building these incredible machines, it turns out that there are also these incredible machines that are building us. So we're talking about proteins. Proteins are really cool. They're in the beer that you're all drinking, the food that you're all drinking. And proteins are famous for many reasons. The one on the left here that I'm showing is called kinesin. If you look at the kind of little features that you see on this orange guy, those are actually single atoms. And this is a rendering with molecularly accurate simulations. Kinesin uses ATP, that's this energy molecule in cells, to actually catalyze and turn chemical energy into mechanical energy. It's pretty cool. It makes for really good movies. It walks just like humans. Here it's kind of like Santa Claus taking cargo from one side of the cell to the other. And there's another protein that's really cool, ribosome. A ribosome is a protein complex, and this has one of the most important functions in the biological world because it, while it is a protein, makes proteins. And you can actually see in this image on the right, a protein being born. So this protein, like all other proteins, is an amino acid chain. So amino acids are basically chains of these small molecules. There are several of them that our bodies make and others that our bodies don't make that we have to ingest. But each protein is a unique sequence of those amino acids. So the footing that we're on here with biology is so strong that actually biologists call what I'm about to describe to you the central dogma. It is at the center and it is a dogma. This is how biology works. There's a process by which DNA, that's sort of the blueprint of life, is converted through a couple steps and sent into the ribosome. The ribosome reads these little components of DNA, RNA at that point, and it turns them into, one at a time, an amino acid, just stitches them together in this really long chain. And at the bottom, we're showing a small cartoon of what one of those chains looks like. Here there are 7 amino acids just kind of linked together. And then through this fairly magical process of biological origami, the protein takes that long chain of amino acids and it folds up into some rich 3-dimensional structure with a very particular shape. It does that time in, time out. And the function of what that protein ends up serving is tied directly to the 3-dimensional shape that that origami folding process puts it into. So a ribosome always folds into the same shape, and the shape of that ribosome is critical for its function of producing amino acid chains and the rest of the proteins of life. So your form is really equivalent to function. But when I was a grad student, the exact process by which this origami rule set unfolded was unknown. So we called it the protein folding problem. It was a very open problem in biology, central to all of life. And we couldn't exactly figure out the rules by which these amino acids folded out. And people spent entire careers looking at the protein folding problem. Then, just a few years ago, a company called DeepMind, which is now owned by Google, came along with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and they turned this into a data problem. Now, what they did is they basically, in one fell swoop, solved all of the protein folding problem. They said, let's throw this huge data set at machine learning, and we will teach the machines how to fold proteins. And they did this with remarkable accuracy. So on the right, you see an example of a protein that was folded by AlphaFold correctly. This one's called Pikachu, which I think is kind of some Japanese guy discovered it and decided to name it after the Pokemon Pikachu. So there's Pikachu. It lives in your retinal synapse or something. Now, that's a truly remarkable feat. And I want to dig into a little bit of what's lying under the hood for computers so that we can understand how we might. So there are a couple things that you need for computers, but you may have all heard that computers operate on zeros or ones. Everything is zeros or ones in computers. Now, one of the things that you need in order to store and process those zeros or ones, of course, is to remember what the zeros and ones are. And the way that we do that in a computer is with these transistors. Now, transistors are the small features that are being patterned by those big machines. They get patterned onto little wafers, diced up, and then packaged into chips. And there are tons of these transistors on these chips. In part, what they're doing is trying to remember where the zeros or ones are. So here we have just a little electronic circuit where basically this transistor just acts like a light switch, on or off. It lets electrical current flow, or it prevents electrical current from flowing. And it just charges up this little thing called a capacitor, which is like a battery. So if the battery is charged up, we've got a 1. If the battery is not charged up, we've got a 0, and this is all controlled by the electrical current flow in those capacitors, or in the transistors. Now, zeros or ones are rather unassuming, sort of innocuous little things, but it turns out that you can produce and store lots of really rich information with just zeros or ones. In normal everyday life, the number 65, we actually write in a base called decimal, but you can represent that number in binary too. Instead of sort of counting up to 9 and then carrying the 1 to the 10th spot every time, it's a little more laborious, but you can count up to 2 and you carry the next line to the 2's spot, and so on. So you can write 65 in the language of binary with 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. But that same number, if you choose to speak a different language, and as long as everyone agrees what language we're speaking, could mean something different. It could be the capital A, And the capital A is what this same number represents in the language called ASCII, Common Text Encoding Language. Similarly, there's another language, RGB 888, and RGB 888 decides that this number means the color red. Now, the point is just that we can use simple zeros or ones to encode lots of different kinds of information. But just encoding the information, just remembering it, is not particularly interesting. We also need to process the information to get new insights out. And the way we do that is with little electronic circuits called gates. So here we pattern up a few more transistors in our imaging process, and we just run electrical currents through these things. Here, if we bring in bit A from memory, bit B from memory, we're processing what's called a NAND gate, which basically says it's the opposite of whether both of them are true. And this NAND gate is special because it's what's called universal, which means any kind of arithmetic or any kind of other information processing you might want to do can all be boiled down to these NAND gates. So at the heart of it, computers are just ways to store zeros and ones and ways to process zeros and ones, and we just do a very tiny electronic circuits. That's all there is. Now, I don't mean to be flippant because it turns out we can do really cool things with these. So, for example, let's agree that with some list of numbers, what we're encoding, the language we're speaking, is some chain of amino acids. We'll encode a chain of amino acids in some numbers. And then we will run it through a lot of gates. And if we do it just right, those lots of gates that we put together are called a deep residual net. And congratulations, y'all, we have just invented AlphaFold once we decode on the other side. It is, in a sense, really this simple, but I hope this gives you a sense for how rich the kinds of information processing are that we can do with just zeros and ones and pushing them through circuits. But nevertheless, there is a gigantic hole in what we can do even with such rich behavior. There's some corner of the universe that we will never access with this kind of computation. And in order to get there, I'm going to introduce you to one last protein. It's called nitrogenase. This is another very important protein. So nitrogenase is a big protein complex. It lives in like cyanobacteria down in the soil. And nitrogenase has a very important function. It takes in nitrogen from the air. So this air that we're breathing has a very large portion of not just oxygen from dioxide, but also nitrogen, two nitrogen molecules which have a really strong chemical triple bond. So nitrogen comes into this molecule, and then there's this huge electronic multiple step dance within the molecule, and on the other side out pops ammonia, NH3. Now ammonia is at least verbally slightly related to amino acids, because every amino acid contains ammonia. You cannot build the amino acids without ammonia, which means that no life would be possible without this process of taking nitrogen and converting it to ammonia. This is where all the proteins come from. In fact, we have humanity, a sort of knockoff of this process that we find in nature. We have this huge energy and pressure intensive process called Haber-Bosch. And Haber-Bosch has produced roughly 50% of the ammonia in your bodies. That's how important this process is. It goes into the food through fertilizer, and then your bodies are made of this very much. However, as a problem, the Haber-Bosch process emits something like almost 1 billion tons of CO2 per year. So this is not ideal. We have several problems with CO2 on this planet. We would like to reduce it. We'd like to reduce its origins. And one of the ways you could imagine doing that is understanding this process of nitrogenase, which emits 0 CO2, and trying to copy it. Let's see, can we engineer a process better that doesn't emit so much CO2? The issue is that despite understanding that nitrogenase performs this function for over a century, we still do not understand how it works. And one of the reasons that we don't understand how it works is because the quantum mechanics going into this process are incredibly, unbelievably difficult to understand. So let's think about this. Right. We're going to explain it though. All right, so nitrogen is like a little two atom molecule that flies in somehow to this active site of nitrogen. Now, if we think about what's going on in that nitrogen molecule, what I've shown here in green is sort of like a picture of what the electrons look like. So this is sort of a distribution of where you might find the electrons if you were to look inside the molecule. Now, the thing is, the electrons can be in multiple states. They can occupy different spatial shapes. They could be in the top one, they could be in the second one, they could be in the third one. They can't be in shapes in between, but they can be in these different states, we'll call them. The thing that's slightly more complicated is that they can even be in what's called a superposition of these states. So it can be sort of like 50% one, 50% the other, maybe it's 60-40, I don't know. Now this is really odd, because if you were to actually ask the question, is the electron here or is it there? The answer to that question is kind of like 50-50. It's kind of 50% here, it's kind of 50% there. Now, that's very strange. I cannot both be here giving you this talk and also at home watching Netflix at the same time. But there's a sense in which electrons can do exactly that. That's foreign to you and I, but it's actually, I think, quite intuitive if you think about this other example of colors. So let's take the color orange. If I were to ask you, let's do audience participation. If I were to ask anyone whether the color orange is red, what would you say? The color orange is red. Yeah. It is red. They are identical. Orange and red are the same thing. You would equate them to one another.
Same thing.
Same thing.
I wasn't going to say same thing, but orange is made from.
It's made from, okay, so it has some sort of componentry. Orange has a component of red. Okay, probably similar answer to yellow. Right? This is the component. It's colored by yellow, but it is not itself yellow, and it is not itself red. Otherwise, we're calling the same thing. It's also not really both red and yellow. Orange is like its own thing. It's a different thing, and it's certainly not neither. You all apparently would agree with that. So the funny thing about orange is that it is its own thing, although it contains contributions from both red and orange. In the same way, the state of an electron is like the color orange. It has a little bit of here, it has a little bit of there, but it is really its own thing. So that's superposition. Things get even more complicated from there.
I'm going to need a drink.
If we more drinks, Jeff's ready. He's taking orders. If we zoom in back to that active site, we've got a few more atoms: orange, green, orange, gray, all sorts of atoms sitting in there, and they can each be in their own electronic states. Moreover, they can each be in their own superposition of electronic states. So now we'll do a slightly mathy thing. We're not going to do any math. We're just going to agree on how to write some things down. But if you look back at that superposition, instead of saying the electron in nitrogen, the green molecule, could be 50% one, 50% the other. Let's give them some variables, x and y. And what happens to be true, what we just said, is that each of the gray and orange atoms could also be in their own superpositions of their own electronic states. And there's one more step of complication, because the state that each electron is in influences the state that another electron might be in at a different part of this whole movie that we're trying to recreate. Not only is that true between the states that I've shown, but it's also true for all of the states in all of the green and all of the orange states. It's also true between orange and gray, and it's true between gray and green. This is an unbelievably messy mathematical thing to write down. But at least for our example that we started with, it's a little bit cleaner. So not only can each atom be in its own set of states, its own superposition states, we really just have to look at the whole quantum system as its own state, which is a combination of the states that each of the components are in. And maybe that's no longer 50-50, it's not quite as simple, but it's like 10-10, 20-30, 10-5-5, or something like that. So we just add some new numbers, z's, and we say, okay, great, we can describe the entire quantum system by just saying it's some combination of all of these different states that happen. So how would we simulate this on a classical computer? This is where we're going to start to get into trouble. Sure, I'll take it.
So I'm sorry, I know because you're kind of going on, and I want to make sure that I understand the implications of what you said before. So I understand those are the cross products of the various superposition states. I'm guessing for green it's nitrogen. Do those represent the nitrogen, hydrogen, and the ammonia, or the other, the orange and the red?
These are, yeah, the green and the orange are just cartoonish pickouts that I've selected. So it's just sort of like there's an orange color down here, there's a gray color down here.
Oh, okay, so that's the nitrogen ice in the nitrogen ice enzyme. Okay, got it.
Exactly. So here's nitrogen coming in. This is a small portion that we have zoomed into the nitrogenase.
Okay.
This is just where a lot of the fun action happens.
Okay.
And for details, for example, gray is a molybdenum atom.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure and you kind of sort of what they meant. That's okay. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So how would we understand how this process unfolds if we were to look on a regular classical computer? Well, what we do is we take the state, we saw all those z's, 10, 10, 20, 30, 5, 5, whatever, and we would kind of write them down in a list of numbers. And that would be our encoding. We would agree each one of these numbers represents, this is how much like this particular part of the quantum state, the whole thing looks like. Then we pump that through a bunch of math, which, as you know, is a lot of gates, just a lot of gates in a regular computer. That math we would use to represent the Schrodinger equation. This is how quantum mechanics evolves. And then we would get some new numbers. The Schrodinger equation would tell us quantum mechanically, your numbers used to be this, now they're slightly different. And we would just loop that process over and over again to sort of play out how this movie plays out. But the problem, which we're going to be impressed with here in a moment, is that the scaling for how to represent this problem goes up exponentially. So here we had 3 states, 3 atoms, whose one of 2 states we could represent with a bit. And the number of states that are largely entangled system ended up expanding was 8. That's 1 or 2 options for each electron to the 3 power, because we had 3 electrons that we were tracking. So let's take a moment to understand why this is a problem. This is the system we've been looking at, 3 regular old quantum systems. We'll just call them quantum bits because they can be 0 or 1, but in a quantum way. That spans the amount of information that's contained in 8 bits. So we're looking at, on the right, how many quantum bits or how many quantum systems you're tracking. And on the left, we're looking at how many regular computer bits you would need to look at all of the possible states that thing can be in. So at just 37 qubits, the number of quantum states that is spanned and that you would have to track actually matches the number of transistors in a very high-end Apple computer laptop chip. And that's even being generous because, as you saw before, there was maybe 1 transistor to store a bit, there were several transistors to start processing bits. So even just equating the number of transistors is being a little bit generous to regular computers. But this is going to get out of control, so we have to give them some slack. At just 53 qubits, 53, this is like a handful, we have now matched the number of transistors in that huge supercomputer I showed you at the beginning of the talk. That's unbelievable. Like, there are 53 people in this bar right now. So awesome that you all can carry so much information density if you have quantum versions of yourself. All right, any guesses? 165 qubits. How large? What number matches the quantum state space? What is 2 to the 165?
Number of atoms in the universe.
Number of atoms in the universe. That's we're getting there. At this point, we're at the number of atoms on planet Earth. This is the number of atoms on planet Earth. This is how large the quantum state space is that we've scanned with just 165 qubits.
Can you define qubit?
Yeah, qubit is like the 0 or 1, the classical computer, regular computer tracks. It's the quantum version that we're getting to, but up until this point in the talk, it basically just means those two options for the electron that we saw, those superpositions, those are sort of the qubits that we're talking about. So how many electrons are we trying to trap? That's what we mean by qubits on this slide. All right, 270. Now we've got the gentleman in the front who's already understood that this is the atoms in the universe. So you understand that if we were to use a regular computational approach to trying to understand these sorts of very quantum mechanical problems, we run into a fundamental issue. Our universe is not even large enough to compute systems like this in the regular classical way. So we're going to need a quantum version. Now, I introduced you to nitrogenase, so let's just put nitrogenase on this axis. We need something like a little bit over 100 qubits in order to fully simulate nitrogenase, and that matches roughly the number of single bacteria on planet Earth. So it's not quite atoms in the known universe or atoms on planet Earth, but this is an unimaginably large. I also decided to sort of go straight to the source. I asked artificial intelligence, hey, artificial intelligence, how long would it take you to simulate nitrogenase? And this is straight from the horse's mouth. It says many millennia. All right. So how do we use a quantum computer to represent this movie? Remember, we want to play this movie forward to understand the secrets of nature so that we can engineer our processes better. Well, if we have quantum mechanical objects, we could actually just encode these superpositions directly into those quantum mechanical objects. Let's take atoms. Atoms are quantum mechanical. So what we could do is just take each one of these superpositions and put an atom into a superposition that corresponds to the superposition that we're interested in. And it turns out that we got some really good rules for experimentally doing this around the turn of the century through a couple of Nobel Prizes that came through. So around 1997, we got some rules for how to use lasers to cool and trap atoms in vacuum chambers. And then we got some more rules in 2001 for how to make them even colder and bring out the quantum properties. And I did want to pause on this because two of the guys, Eric Cornell and Carl Wyman, these are hometown heroes just up the road. Yeah, we got the bucks. Carl has since moved on to Stanford, but Eric's still here. Great guy. In any case, we can use that rule set that these two Nobel Prizes kicked off for us as a playbook and generate superpositions in atoms that we've trapped in vacuum chambers. So here we can use a laser to tickle the quantum properties of the orange atom and put it into some superposition that will be in one state and some other state. We can do the same thing for the green atom. We can do the same thing for the gray atom. And then with some sequence of pulses, we can just at will make whatever superposition we're interested in doing. Now, we've already looked at encodings and how encodings are important for storing information. So it is important to pause on what does it look like to encode the information in the quantum state that we're interested in. And what we'll do is we'll take each one of those states that we were looking at, and we'll just take a single atom per each one. We'll call that a qubit, because it can be 0 or 1. And then we'll say, if this qubit is 0, it means the electron is not in that state. If this qubit is 1, it means the electron is in that state. So now we have this two-state system. We can be in superpositions of 0 and 1. And now we can encode all the superpositions that we're interested in. But we do need one more ingredient. We need to generate the entanglement. The superposition alone is not enough. We need to get that huge, messy set of interrelations between all of the quantum states. And we also have a set of rules for doing that. We just add another laser, and we can generate entanglement between green and orange, gray and orange, gray and green. And with these two ingredients, this is all we need to cook up that quantum state that we're interested in reproducing. Now we saw how a classical computer pumps through a bunch of gates the quantum state to produce how this sort of quantum movie evolves over time. We can do the same thing with our quantum computer, but it turns out that the rules that we're using to generate the gates, because they are based on quantum mechanics, the Schrödinger equation, the way that quantum mechanics evolves, is actually just built in. And then what happens is we'll run a series of gates, which are quantum gates, I'll kind of update the zeros and ones a little bit. We keep running, keep looping, and this will build up that Ruby that we're interested in understanding how nitrogenase works. So to recap this portion of the talk, let's think about what happened. Okay, so we had regular computers. Those could be zeros or ones, the bits that lived inside regular computers. There was no superposition and there was no entanglement. Bits could only be in a single state at any given time. And essentially what that boils down to, or what that prices you into doing, is that you have to simulate each one of these individual quantum states at a time. And you have to do it essentially serially in a way that explodes exponentially, largely, with how complicated the system is that you're trying to simulate. But even though it has these drawbacks, it can't do quantum mechanics very well, you can still do unbelievably cool things with them, like learn how to fold proteins. So we're not knocking regular computers, they're pretty good. Quantum computers, however, have these quantum versions of bits that can not only be 0 or 1, but also some superposition of 0 and 1, some sort of mixture of 0 and 1 at the same time. We can both superposition our qubits, and we can also entangle them together. And now, instead of having this exponential scaling, we only need n bits, n quantum versions of bits to simulate n quantum things. Nevertheless, they are really hard to build. There are a few really fundamental challenges to building them. One of them is the measurement problem. Even though we have this very rich quantum information living in the state, we actually cannot access all of the information at once. Because when you try to measure a quantum system, it actually just snap decides that it will live in one particular portion of it. So here I just picked one particular portion. So we don't actually get to, within a snapshot, see all of the information that lives in the full quantum state. And I do want to pause on this for a second, because the reason and the process by which this happens remains one of the most interesting and hotly debated outstanding philosophical mysteries within quantum mechanics and physics broadly. Okay, so we have a measurement problem. There's also a problem of error correction. So in a regular computer, there are all sorts of reasons that your bits might get screwed up. Some of the sexiest ways that can happen is that a cosmic ray can come in and flip the state of your bit. So that's possible. In a regular computer, you can take pretty easy approaches to how to fix that problem. So let's say I want to encode 1. I want this system to tell me that my bit is in the state 1. Now, I could just copy it 10 times. Now I have 10 versions of 1. Even if I had a couple of cosmic rays come in and flip my bits, it's fine. I will just ask all of them, hey, what state do you all want to be in? And if 8 out of 10 of them say 1, okay, it's a 1, we're pretty sure, right? Now, in quantum mechanics, one does not simply copy quantum states, right? There's something, deep mathematical truth called the no-cloning theorem that suggests that you cannot just copy quantum information from one place to the next. And furthermore, in the last slide, we saw you cannot just ask the qubits what's there. And this means that we have to be a lot more subtle about how we perform error correction within quantum computers. But one of the nice features of the last several decades is that we did learn that it is possible, and you just have to be able to perform clever about how you do it. Okay, so now we dived really hard into what's living at the heart of quantum computers. What are you going to use these things for? Well, the case in point that we used for this talk was nitrogenase. We wanted to understand better how the biological world takes nitrogen molecules and turns them into ammonia molecules, because we as humans have some inefficiencies in the way that we do that. So nitrogen fixation is something that we're really interested in. Carbon capture is another thing that we're really interested in, waiting for carbon dioxide molecules to flow by so that you can trap them, take them out of the atmosphere so they stop greenhouse warming. And there are lots of other chemistry applications, like looking for drug therapies where quantum mechanical interactions between the drug and the molecule that it's targeting are really important for understanding how well some drug candidate can work. There are other very quantum things that you can do with quantum computers, like simulate materials, like fancy magnets or superconductors, make better batteries, all that kind of stuff. And then there's a whole host of other things, like the fact that there's this huge amount of information density in these large entangled states actually holds some promise for doing quantum juiced machine learning algorithms. And another set of possible applications for quantum computers are in optimization, because it turns out that nature itself solves an optimization problem every moment of every day in every system, because it likes to find the lowest energies. And finding lowest energies is an optimization problem. There are lots of optimization problems out there in the world that you might be interested in, like how to optimize the order in which you watch your Netflix shows. However, there are lots of things that quantum computers are probably not going to help us with, like cat videos or video games or arithmetic. So regular computers are here to stay, but all of these applications on the left are really nice homes for where quantum computers can come in and help solve problems that classical computers simply cannot even access. All right, so how do we build these things? It turns out that is also hotly debated. So let's look at a few of the technologies. One of them is superconducting versions of qubits, these little superconducting circuits. And this is actually where quantum computing really cut its teeth. This is the sort of longest technology that's been around. It's the most mature one. It has the advantage that you can manufacture these systems pretty well with existing processes, but it has several problems. The qubits don't live for very long in their quantum states before the states get screwed up. It's really difficult to entangle qubits that are really far away, which was one of the ways that we were generating an advantage through quantum. And it's really hard to imagine scaling these processors up to the kinds of sizes that we would need to use for simulating nitrogenase, for example. So there's another technology that I think holds a little bit more promise, and that's trapped ions. Trapped ions solve some of the problems of the superconducting qubits, but they don't solve all of them. For example, it's difficult to scale up these processors to the kinds of sizes we're interested in. And it's also sort of bespoke manufacturing that is like large rooms, kind of like the large supercomputer. However, I'm not too worried about that bespoke manufacturing, simply because we think that there are really niche applications for these quantum computers. Very high level arm applications, but niche. So it's not necessarily the kind of thing that you worry about putting in your own home, unless you're a very particular kind of person. There's one more technology that I think holds the most promise, and that's using regular atoms. So ions were these atoms where an electron got knocked off and it had some electrical charge. That has an advantage that that electrical charge, using electronics, makes it really easy to hold on to and grab. Now, that's less true for neutral atoms, but those Nobel Prizes around the turn of the century gave us rules for focusing light to trap atoms in beams of light. Now, these neutral atom architectures are kind of the new kids on the block. We're sort of catching up from behind, and this is sort of like the new thing on the scene. One of the things that we are still working on is how good our gates are. So the gates need to perform well. They need to not introduce new errors. And we are working really hard on improving those to the point where we think we're right around the corner from having a really transformative technology. And it solves all the other problems, because in order to have a larger processor, the way to do that is much more straightforward for neutral atoms than it is for the other ones. You just pump a bunch more laser light in, and you trap more atoms. Now, another hometown hero slide. Yeah, Chris?
Would you say the demand for these products are just going to be exponentially growing over the next year, relative near future?
I think the demand for these products is on a huge upward trend over the next decade. After that, I think we will hit a point in the market where we're looking for new applications. We're going to do great on quantum chemistry things. We're looking towards optimization applications. But this is a fundamentally new way of computing, and there are new rules that you have to write programs by. And it is very conceivable that we have not imagined the most important application of these computers yet, but we do know that the applications that we know about are super solid.
Sorry, just to kind of give an engineering picture, like how big would it be when you block of machinery to represent one qubit in like the three different, you know, styles of it?
So for trapped ions and neutral atoms, we'll see in a moment. You can kind of see a picture in both the IBM and Google bits on the bottom left. So IBM and Google made early bets on superconducting qubits, which are these big behemoth companies that thought this was the most mature technology at the time, so they really ran. And they've done good work up until now. But what you can see there is what's called a dilution refrigerator. So there's like a small chip that all of these wires are wired into. They carry mostly microwave signals. And then you put a big encasing over this dilution refrigerator, and it pumps down to 4 Kelvin, really low temperature. And that thing is probably the size of, if I stack these 2 barrels on top of each other, that's roughly the size of a whole quantum computer made of a superconducting architecture that it could be hundreds of qubits inside.
Ah, okay. So you can have multiple, the refrigeration can work for multiple.
Exactly. Yeah, then there's a whole host of peripheral devices, electronic circuitry to generate the microwave that we're going to send in. So it's not true that that is the entire system contained within the 2 barrels. There's other stuff outside of it too. Great. So then the next ones we'll see in a moment. I'll show you a real picture actually. We'll go to it. But I just want to pause and mention that the area that we're living in is a real hotbed for quantum computing. We have a couple of the most important companies around. One of them is Quantinuum, down a few miles away in Broomfield. I have a couple of friends over there. They're working on trapped ions. We've got a couple of the most promising neutral atom companies up the road in Boulder in atom computing and inflection, where I work. And I will say before moving on that there are a couple other architectures that folks are looking into, but they're a little bit more exotic, less obviously likely to work. Okay, so I told you that at the end of this, we will probably have engineered one of the coolest machines that humanity has ever seen. And this is a very beautiful CAD rendering of the kinds of systems that we build. So you can see lots of optics that route laser beams to take a look at quantum properties of the atoms inside. And inflection, which used to be called cold quantum, has started out making these glass vacuum cells that people use ubiquitously for cold atom and trapped ion experiments. If you zoom into what's going on inside one of these glass cells at the center of our machine, you can see this array. And this array, this grid, these are actually single atoms that you're seeing light come out of. And we have fantastic tools for trapping this kind of thing.
Quick question, what's the size of your CAD rendering in real life?
Yeah.
Well, you're probably getting that, never mind.
I actually hid that slide because that picture is so much prettier. So this is what it looks like in real life. This is roughly like a kitchen table sized device. And similarly to the superconducting architecture, there's a bunch of peripheral devices elsewhere. Okay, so we built this quantum computer. Looks beautiful. The vision, of course, as we continue working on these gate fidelities and scaling up these architectures, we learn eventually how nitrogenase works. We run that quantum movie forward to figure out how it processes information. Because after all, even though this is very difficult for a regular classical computer to do, nitrogenase is this tiny molecule sitting inside bacteria. Like, this is not a difficult problem. We just have to change the way that we compute in order to understand what's going on. Once we do, we can engineer our own molecules and create a bunch of happy people, improve healthcare, improve energy, tackle climate change, and that's what we're excited to do with inflection. With that, I'll just throw up some reminders about what we talked about. Take more questions if you have any. Thank you.
Traditional computers were going like 1 year.
Yep. Okay, so the question was, in the case of regular computing, we have these transistors and bits, and we're processing them through gates. What is it that we're actually doing in quantum computing with atoms? Yeah, the idea is that we have on the right, we have this array of atoms, and then we address the atoms with laser beams. And as we address the atoms with laser beams, over time, what we're doing is we're manipulating the quantum state, we're entangling atoms with each other. So this is the process of executing the gates. And what 0 or 1, or what combination of 0 or 1 and 1 that each qubit is superposed in, shows up as based on a detection protocol. When we take a picture of the atoms, we'll take a picture only of the zeros or only of the ones. So could you take a picture, yeah, that's like 10% of 0 and 90% of 1? The problem comes back to that measurement problem that we stopped on, that said when we try to take a picture, it's gonna choose 1. So there are a couple. It just picks 0 or 1. It's 100% 0 or 1 each time you run the experiment, each time you run the survey. So there are a couple ways to address that. One is you can just run it many times and build up some statistics and say, oh yeah, 10% of the time it was 0 and 90% of the time it happens to be a 1. Or you can leverage other features of quantum mechanics that I didn't address, but I have extra slides on if you're interested. And that can sort of direct the qubits towards the right answer so that you can more reliably get the 0 or 1 that you're interested in. All 5? Yeah, the question was which architecture is being chosen for these quantum computers. It is not strictly known what the best way to build them is. So all 5 and more, by the way, of these approaches are being pursued by different people, and different folks have different reasons for assuming or opining that one will work better than the other. Inflection is bet, and I very much agree, is that neutral atoms are going to be the way to build quantum processors, and it's going to solve a lot of the problems that we've seen in previous quantum processors.
Or you said 5.
There's a couple hiding.
What are the chemicals? What are the atoms in neutral atoms?
Different neutral atom systems take different approaches. What we're using in inflection is cesium atoms. Atom computing used to use strontium, and I think they switched to ytterbium. Quera uses rubidium. I think Pascal also uses rubidium.
Those are pretty heavyweight.
They're fairly heavy.
Why do they have to be heavy? Is that
the reason that we're roughly restricted to these atoms is that they look sort of like hydrogen, and they're sort of like they're all in the same column. That's not true actually for atom computing. We'll have to come back. There are lots of details to talk about for atom computing, but for all the other ones, we like to use atoms that look like hydrogen because there's a single electron that kind of orbits on the outside, and that single electron is a really easy handle to manipulate the quantum state of. Once you start to get into other portions of the periodic table, there's like multiple electrons and they kind of influence each other in a way. So if you just have that one on the outside, it's a really clean quantum system. Yeah. And then for them to be heavier is also somewhat helpful because what we try to do is use lasers to cool up the atomic motion. Temperature is kind of like the random motion of the sort of energy of motion in molecules. That's not
so the laser pointing is literally about heating? Is that what?
Laser pointing does a few things in the system. One is to track the atom. Several lasers cool the motion out of the atom so it quiets down into the bottom of the track. So that it's trapped really tightly. And then others manipulate the quantum state of the atom. And so these tricks that we've used, in particular the ones used in the Nobel Prize around 2001, have produced far and away the coldest temperature we're talking about billions above absolute zero.
So I've read that manufacturing is a big issue, that we don't have the people available to manufacture chips. How does Mutual Atoms address that, and what do you mean by the scope?
Yeah, so the question is about manufacturing. Manufacturing is difficult for all electronic circuits right now. Um, we're all worried about China invading Taiwan in 2027. So go CHIPS Act, let's get TSMC in Arizona, sounds great. Now, the same manufacturing processes used to produce those chips are used to produce superconducting circuits, and also, by the way, kind of the one that Microsoft has bet on, and to a lesser extent, Quantum, which is using photons. The bespoke manufacturing has to do mostly with the fact that, at least at the current state of affairs, the kinds of systems that we're building are these large rooms with tons of lasers in them. And we have plans for shrinking down those systems using similar technology to what Quantum does, where those lasers that are huge boxes right now, in principle, we can shrink them onto a chip and keep them on a chip. And over time, we imagine shrinking these systems to like the size of a barrel, for example. Nevertheless, right now, there's an extent to which these are kind of academic devices. It requires a lot of PhDs to build them and tune them and make sure that they operate properly. Over time, we'll get better at that. But for now, the manufacturing is bespoke in that way.
Actually, what you said was just, I had another one, but sorry, if you don't mind, two questions. So the first one is, I'm curious about, you mentioned about shrinking lasers to chips. Optical computing was like a hot topic in the 90s, but there were so many like practical problems in fabrication, et cetera. So is it a case where maybe some of that technology can come back to drive this?
Exactly. Yeah, so that set of technologies called photonic integrated circuits. It is already coming back. Optical computing chips are coming back. There's a lot of really interesting advantages to optical computing chips, like photons travel a lot faster than electrons. There's a lot less waste of electricity in the process. So data centers, while they can hold proteins, have the disadvantage that they are really energy intensive. And optical computing chips do have some ways to solve those problems. And we would use really related technology to shrink these systems down.
Makes a lot of sense. So the second question was, and maybe this one is tricky, but so okay, from a computing perspective, you mostly talked about processing. Of course, the other two main, components of the domain architecture is input-output memory. So is input-output basically about the lasers trapping the atoms with a bias to a particular state, and then memory. I could kind of imagine that memory. I'm just kind of like, wait, if you can't read it, you can't measure it. How on earth do you know?
Yes, exactly. So yeah, the question is about how do you remember the states? How do you generate an input state for the computation that you then go to process and figure out what comes out the other side? The preparation of the state, you're exactly dead on. You use lasers, and there's a roughly deterministic process for preparing all of the quantum bits in the zero state. And then from that baseline, we perform all of these gates in order to generate non-trivial quantum states. Then at the end, we have to read the information out. The way that we do that, which I didn't talk about too much, is actually just take a picture. So we shine light on the atoms and we let them spit out photons to us. And those photons only come to us if they're in the one state, and not if they're in the zero state. So just by taking a picture, we actually learn which of the states the qubits are in.
Are you doing that with that voting mechanism? You have to say problem process, and then like which was the maximum.
Right, you can't use what's called a repetition code that you're describing. You repeat the state several times, and then you take the majority vote, that's often called. We can't do that in quantum mechanics because we can't copy the information from one field to the next. So that was there's this whole field of ways of doing error correction beyond the repetition code. There's actually a quantum version of the repetition code. But there are ways of doing error correction that don't disturb the state and allow us to perform error correction. But we didn't talk about it. Those are complicated.
It sounds great exploding.
Back a couple of slides on applications, you talked about bringing RSA.
Yes.
And I noticed you sort of glossed over it.
We did.
So I thought I would bring that up.
Sure.
That's really key to how our world works.
Yes. So now we'll talk about breaking RSA. Cybersecurity is first.
Hold it to the top.
Is that all it takes? That took more than a break earlier. Thank you. Okay, so we'll talk about RSA breaking and encryption now. RSA is the cybersecurity protocol that we use to encrypt, say, like a credit card number that you're trying to pay Amazon with that you don't want people to take. And the method by which RSA operates, which is the foundation of basically all modern cybersecurity, is it generates this gigantic number that is the multiplication of two prime numbers. And in order to break the code, you just need to figure out what the two prime numbers were that made that very large number. And it turns out that a guy named Peter Shor, a couple decades ago, I think in the 90s, discovered a protocol by which a quantum computer could learn those prime factors way faster than regular computers. The reason this has worked for so long is that the process of learning those prime numbers is unimaginably inefficient within regular computers. You actually just literally keep trying new sets of prime numbers, which take way too long. So quantum computers can indeed break RSA encryption by learning what those prime numbers are. I put this in the sort of slightly unsure category because it is quite sure that this algorithm can learn the prime factors and break RSA encryption. What I think is most likely to happen from now, and NIST, we have a version of NIST up the road. NIST is about to come out with some recommendations for ways of encrypting information that does not rely on this prime factor method, and therefore should be resilient to quantum computers. So I think it is most likely that at least the most sensitive information in the world will transition to a new form of encryption before quantum computers get to the point where we're breaking codes.
Sorry, is this a hacker presentation?
We can make it. That's just an opinion. We'll see exactly how it unfolds, but it's definitely something to watch because it's not necessarily true that every communication protocol is going to switch in time. Of course, I think that countries' national secrets and whatnot will be encrypted in a different way pretty soon. Yes.
Like really big people.
Yes. Huge. Yeah. Every government is really interested in integrating quantum computers, but it's hard. We're close though.
Like for traditional computing versus quantum computing, like what are we like at the very early stages of quantum computing? Are we like becoming more mature, or like what an analog is there to like standard classical computing? I guess.
Yeah. So
Is that even predictable right now?
definitely. The question is, where are we in this sort of technology roadmap? How long is it going to take us to get to useful computers? How does it map to the birth of regular computers? There's a picture of what's called the ENIAC, probably in the middle of the century or something. And that was before transistors were really shrunken down to small sizes where you could add them on chips. And people were literally plugging vacuum tubes into huge rooms. And that's kind of the stage that we're in with quantum computers. It's building room-sized computational devices. All of us have plans for them to shrink them to be a little bit smaller. Neutral atoms have the most promising technology. Probably along with trapped ions. We have a lot of similarities with trapped ions. But we're at the point now where, if we go back to this slide, describing the number of qubits, we're at that sort of 53 qubit mark generally as a community.
It's like age 1 to 100.
If I were to put the technology of quantum computing within age 1 to 100, I think we're around 12. Yeah, we're adolescents. We're like tween. We're not quite teenagers, but we're about at the prime of our life. Pretty close. Yes, we have fairly small systems right now. We're scaling them up rapidly. For example, neutral atoms, there was a paper that was published in preprint form 2 months ago, I think, where there were 6,000 qubits trapped. Now, not all of those qubits are trapped in a way that is useful to building a full-scale quantum computer, but the fact of the matter is, we know how to scale up these processors pretty well, these neutral atoms, to pretty large sizes.
Is it true they're building like a quantum computer to figure out the weather above the mountains? Somewhere close to like Wyoming or here?
I haven't heard of any quantum computers above the mountains. I have heard of quantum computers being used to compute weather prediction models. I admit that this is the thing in my slides I ended the least, so I made it yellow. But yeah, the whole weather prediction thing is slightly beyond me. I need some research. But you could do that. You don't have to put the computer on the top of the mountain. You could do it.
No, I just thought they had one here, like locally,
I see.
where they were building one in concert with Intel to try to predict the weather patterns. No, yeah.
No.
To predict the weather patterns.
Yeah, there is actually, it's not a quantum computer, but there's a supercomputer in Wyoming that is owned and operated by NCAR that they do use to predict the weather.
Ah, sure. There you go.
You heard right. We'd like to thank Eric for coming on. And make an incredibly complicated topic somewhat understandable to us regular folk. And thank you all for coming out. We're going to have another science series talk. It's going to be July 29th, another Monday night. We're going to have a CU professor who is a historian and filmmaker talking about the history of NCAR in part. So in the high altitude observatory they have up in the mountains near Leadville. So it's really it'll be a departure from this, but still science. And come on by and visit us. Keep an eye out on the website and social media. So thank you guys.